Welcome to a special edition of Radio Her, brought to you by the Women in Business Association at U of T Scarborough. In this 5-part series, hosted by Elina and Matthew Fuller, we explore entrepreneurship through the perspective of failure and how we can redefine, accept, and overcome this inevitable obstacle in our lives.
So we've talked about how failure is not one thing. There are many factors at play. But once we've taken the time to step out, look at everything, make a judgment, how do we know when it's time to call something?
It's always the toughest question to answer because it depends. And I don't want to give a cop-out answer, but it depends on so many things. There are things that are within your control, like how much energy do you have? Mm-hmm. How much time do you have to give to this project or this company? But sometimes it's things that are out of your control. For example, we're in one of the worst markets to raise money. So how am I going to find funding? So sometimes you have to call it when you don't want to call it. But sometimes you also have to call it when it really isn't working. So we always have to, we go back to, as an entrepreneur, if you're a tech entrepreneur, you're constantly testing the market. Mm-hmm. You're constantly testing your product as to whether or not they're actually addressing the needs of your user base. And maybe today it is, maybe tomorrow it's not. Maybe someone else is going to come up with something better, and yours becomes completely obsolete. Mm. So it's constantly keeping your head to your ears to the ground, and doing the research and testing and retesting, and to make sure that you're well informed. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, if all else fails, if you go, okay, we've tested it, it's not doing it anymore, are we talking to the wrong audience? So is there another group of people that this product could be for? And if there's nobody else that's actually using your product, then you go, right, but can we add something to the product or take away something from the product mm-hmm. in order to make it work? So after you've thought about all these potential pivots to the company and the actual product itself, and if none of those things work, you have to then sit back and go, maybe this isn't working. Mm. And what does that mean? It's like, is there anything salvageable from your product? Because after you put in all this time, there are definitely there's definite value that's there, whether it's your database mm-hmm. of users, or it's certain technology behind your product, or the team. Mm-hmm. Can you turn that asset into something else? Mm-hmm. And so after you've exhausted all of these options, then you can say, okay, I think it's time to walk away.
Right. But I'm hearing even within that, when it's time, you've tried to pivot things, you tried to see what the more options are, maybe something like this finishes, but we can shift here. Even if we get to the end of that and we say, it's just time to walk away, I'm still hearing it's forward moving, because what is serving me? Especially when you said earlier, you are the product. Mm. All the learning that you've had, all the contacts that you've had, it's not a final destination. You've not arrived at the destination going, oh, well, I guess I fail.
Yeah. But you know what? And I mean, most recently, I've had to make that tough decision, haven't I? And someone said to me, do you know, you've probably learned more failing than you have succeeding in your career. And that's so true, because when I've succeeded, I'm like, well, this feels good. Yeah. And you kind of go on, you reward yourself. But when you fail, you know, whether it's ultimate or not, you end up, you know what not to do in the future. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like burning your hand on the stove. You know never to put your hand on that stove again, or you know to like turn it off and wait a while before you do it. So we always learn from our mistakes more than we learn from the things that we celebrate and we are good at.
Yeah, I say that to people all the time. Like, we're so ready to accept the happy, the fun, the exciting moments in life, but I can't. If you asked me, I couldn't say what really important life lessons I learned from those moments. What I learned was the heartbreak, the failure of a package that I tried to do, or a waste of time, what felt like a waste of time at the moment. And it was in looking at that data and saying, okay, what is this trying to teach me? And sometimes you get to this point where I'm like, I don't want to learn anything more. I'm exhausted. Yeah. Like, I'm tired of all these lessons, but they can be lessons if you let them be. But if you decide to just feel bad and not learn anything from it, then it was a waste. So I'm really hearing you drive home that it's like, stick with the data, stick with the learning. What is it teaching you? What is it telling you?
Yeah. And look, it's a constant thing of, learning and constant. It's not constantly failing so much as you need to fail so many times to succeed because of those lessons, because you learn the lessons. You hear the phrase all the time, right? Oh, I need to fail so many times to succeed. It's because you're learning, because you're improving every single time. You're revisiting the data. So when we talk about, making that tough decision, I want to walk away knowing that I've done everything possible to make that thing work, and make sure that I've addressed all the people and everything. And so I need to walk away knowing, and anything, right? Whether it's a relationship or a business or a project, I want to know that I've tried everything, and then I can walk away. And I also walk away quite slowly because I'm reflecting, I'm doing all these learnings. And I don't rush walking away from something, because when I do walk away, when I do turn off the lights, I want to know that I've done everything to make it work. And it didn't. And it doesn't speak to my capabilities. It's not about me as a person failing. Yeah. Sometimes it's things that are not within my control. It's the market, it's maybe just the wrong timing or whatever. But ultimately, I think we need to, like you said, celebrate the successes more, because I reflect on my career and says, I've done pretty well for myself. This time it didn't work. It's going to happen. Yeah. And you have to be a little bit forgiving. But yeah, so when we walk away, we just need to look at all these various options, try to look for and mine the opportunities to pivot. And, if all else fails, then you go, okay, well, look at all these lessons and value that I can bring to my next adventure.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to mention that as we're redefining failure, I think it's also important to remember that you don't have to give all of yourself. I think it's great to, and there's something so rewarding when you give your all to something and it turns out that rush that you get is incredible. But it's also okay to go, I'm choosing to not give any more of myself to this, and do that consciously, and say, and that comes through checking with your values, what you want. Sometimes in entrepreneurship, you realize that actually, I thought I wanted this, or I thought I wanted to go this direction, but I learned through the journey that is not quite right. And being able to take that moment to reflect and say, oh, I don't want to put any more of this way. And that doesn't make me a failure. That makes me more aware. But again, and then the ego comes back in, and it's like, oh, because I've identified so much. So it's this constant learning, constant reflecting that we've been talking about through the entire series here, of knowing ourselves and stepping out and seeing a bigger picture.
And I think that's so important, what you said about defining ourselves. Like, we're redefining the F word, but it's also, how do we define ourselves? Because we are so multifaceted as people. We're not one aspect of our lives. And careers is one aspect. Relationships are one aspect. Just because I break up with someone, does that make me a failure? Just because my company doesn't work, does that make me a failure? No, because I have other things that are working out, right? So sometimes we need to then going back to just wrap everything up is that balance. Is going, okay, maybe this aspect isn't working, but maybe something else in my life is flourishing as a result.
Yeah. We are not just machines here to create products. We have so many aspects. We have so many things that give us joy. And it's easy to fall into that rabbit hole of work. But it is really important that as we exist, for however long we're going to exist on this planet, that we feel fulfilled and we're consciously putting energy into things to create that well-balanced life. And, you know, sometimes we pick up beliefs and ideas about the way that we should be going. I once worked with someone who had gotten an incredible offer for a promotion. It meant uprooting his life, and it was going to give him that ego or that fulfillment that his ego wanted of attaining a certain role. But ultimately, after working on it together, he realized that that was just an external belief that he had been carrying, and it didn't actually sit with where he wanted his life to go. And that's hard. I mean, there's so many factors that drive us to do things. It's not just how our brain works. We're influenced by society, by our families, by beliefs that we have, that we pick up along the way. And so all the work I do with entrepreneurs, or anyone indeed, is around themselves, because we exist in the world as ourselves. So anything we accomplish is going to come through this vessel. Yeah.
So, I mean, as we define ourselves as a multifaceted person, you have to look at failures as more like value, right? And they're valuable lessons that you can, and they're transferable skills that you can bring to your next thing. I mean, the people who are listening to this podcast are probably at the beginning of their careers. So all you got is time, right? I'm 20 years in, and I'm still thinking, oh man, like I could use a few more failures in order to get to where I ultimately may go, right? And so it's never over. You're never going to stop learning. You're never going to stop failing. And if you stop failing, you're probably not doing much, right? So that's a way to look at it as well, is just hoping that this podcast would give people a different perspective when things don't work.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Radio Her, discussing how we can learn from and redefine failure in the world of business and entrepreneurship. Be sure to stay tuned for a final entrepreneurship event hosted on March 6th, where we will be hosting a fireside chat alongside these amazing entrepreneurs. Make sure to follow Wibba's Instagram and check out the link in our bio to save your spot for this incredible event. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Radio Her, and make sure to check out our Spotify account for more of Wibba's podcasts.